So I've been talking to Grok about the national debt. Okay, you can go look further into this, find the sources and stuff. But from what I'm seeing, the United States has 38 trillion in national debt. About 13 trillion of that is just the government owing itself money. 25 trillion of that is the government owing other entities like foreign governments, foreign companies and stuff, and domestic domestic sources like companies and people and stuff. So when you talk about the United States debt to foreign governments, it's about 3.5 to 4 trillion. And most of that is owed to Japan at about 1.1 trillion, China at about 770 billion, the UK at like 3 to 400 billion, and Belgium, Luxembourg, Ireland, which is another few hundred billion each. Then you have places like Taiwan, India, Saudi Arabia, and stuff with smaller chunks. So when you talk about our government being in debt to other governments, it's about 3.5 to 4 trillion dollars. So if you ask how much do foreign governments owe us, to negate this debt, foreign governments owe us 50 or 60 billion dollars. And those governments are said to be Egypt, Ukraine, and Israel mostly. So as far as the U.S. owing foreign entities, they owe about 8 trillion to foreign entities. About 3.5 to 4 trillion of that is to foreign governments. The rest is to like private sectors, foreign private sectors. So it says that private foreign entities don't really owe the U.S. anything, not much. Domestic private entities owe the U.S. government about $4 to $4.2 trillion. So when it comes to private U.S. entities, foreign governments own U.S. private entities about $4 trillion. And U.S. private entities owe almost nothing to foreign governments. So it says in terms of U.S. private entities owing foreign private entities money and foreign private entities owing U.S. private entities money, foreign private entities owe U.S. private entities $8 trillion, about $8 trillion. U.S. private entities owe foreign private entities about $4.5 trillion. So if you subtract that, foreign private entities owe U.S. private entities $3.5 trillion. If you subtract, what the U.S. private entities owe them. So doing the math on just talking to Grok, not actually really going into the sources, but just using this information, the U.S. government owes foreign governments about $4 trillion and foreign private entities about $4 trillion. So in total, the U.S. government owes foreigners about $8 trillion. And then the U.S. private sectors owe foreigners about $4 trillion. So for the United States as a whole, that's $12 trillion owed to foreigners. And then foreigners owe the United States government pretty much nothing, but they owe United States private entities about $12 trillion. So foreign governments owe U.S. private entities about $4 trillion, and foreign private entities owe U.S. private entities about $8 trillion. So when you're talking about debt in the United States related to foreigners, the United States government does own foreigners' money more so than foreigners owe the government. But United States private entities are owed more money from foreigners than they owe foreigners. And it cancels out to zero. So again, the United States government owes foreign governments about $4 trillion, but foreign governments owe United States private entities about $4 trillion. The U.S. government owes foreign private entities about $4 trillion, but foreign private entities owe U.S. private entities about $8 trillion. And U.S. private entities owe foreign private entities about $4 trillion. So when you add all that stuff up, it pretty much cancels out. So yes, the government owes foreigners more than foreigners owe the government, but foreigners owe the private sector of the United States more than the private sector of the United States owes foreigners. So then you can talk about what the nation owes itself in terms of what the U.S. government owes the U.S. private sectors and what the U.S. private sectors owe the U.S. government, and you can compare that to other nations, what these other nations owe themselves, especially the nations that we are most indebted to. So when you talk about the U.S. government owing U.S. private sectors, they owe about $16 trillion, and U.S. private sectors owe the U.S. government about $4 trillion. So when you compare that to our, the people that we are most indebted to, Japan, China, the UK. So it says Japan owes its private sector $8 to $9 trillion, and its private sector owes Japan relatively nothing. So when you talk about the GDP of the nations, Japan owes its private sector 210% of its GDP, and the U.S. government owes its private sector 41% of its GDP. So when you talk about China, China owes its private sector about $9 to $10 trillion, and its private sector owes China roughly nothing. So in terms of GDP, that's 48 to 52% of China's GDP is owed to its private sector, while the United States owes 41% of its GDP to its private sector. When you talk about the UK, they owe their private sector about $2.65 trillion, and their private sector owes them about $0.45 trillion, so they owe their private sector about 62% of their GDP. So when it comes to how much a nation is in debt to its own country, the U.S. is doing well compared to these other nations. When it comes to how much the nation is in debt to other countries, the U.S. government is not doing well, but the U.S. private sector is actually having a net gain from other countries owing the U.S. private sector, and it cancels out. If you want to compare the numbers of what the private sector is owed versus what the government owes, that would cancel out. So that was just talking to ChatGPT. I didn't really look into detail about these statistics, but so I don't know about the accuracy of all that stuff, but that's just what I looked at in terms of our national debt in the government and private sector compared to these other nations. So I could go more in detail and find trustworthy sources, but that's the kind of stuff that I was looking into.